Thank you, Raul. Oh,
Okay.
okay. So thank you, Raul. So today, as Raul just said, we are talking about budgeting. And this is the first part of a two-part series. The other part will be same time, same place next week. So we're talking to you about budgeting essentials. And essentially, we are going to tell you what a budget is and why you should be bothered about putting together a budget. So we're going to tell you all about it today. The next, please. So part one today, here are the topics we're going to cover. We're going to talk about what a budget is. And in order to do that, we need to look at all the different parts that go into making up a budget. And there are several pieces to a budget. One is expenses. One is income. One is making the plan. So a budget can also actually just be called a plan. And the other piece is the actual. So we have the planned financial position, and then we have what actually happens with your finances, with your income and your expenditure. And once we've looked at all the different pieces of a budget, then we're going to explore why you should budget. Like, what are the reasons that you should go to the trouble of putting together a budget for yourselves? And there are some very important reasons for doing that. Then next week, now that we've understood what a budget is and why we need it, next week we're going to talk about how you can actually use it, how you fill it in. Like you've seen what pieces go together, but how do you actually fill in all those pieces? How do you compare what you planned or what you thought would happen with then what actually does happen? How can you assess what you now have written down on the paper? You've got your plan, you've got what actually happened, but what does that all mean? How can you set goals? So one important piece of the budget thinking is that you are doing it in order to fulfill some goals. So how can you set those goals? And when you look at your budget, what should you change? Should you change something based on what you see happening with your money? Or is it fine just to leave it the same? And we'll look at that. And then finally, we will be discussing how you can save more, because that's one of the purposes of your budget, is to make sure that you not only are very certain that you can manage your day-to-day expenses, but also to see how you can make your money go further and how you can start planning to have some good savings. Okay, so that's very important. So that's going to be the 2 weeks what we'll cover. The next slide, please. So today we're going to be talking again about what a budget is and the 4 different parts of it: the expenses piece and the income piece. What is your plan against what is actually happening, and why you should make a budget. So on the next slide, we'll see what is a budget. A budget is really just a way of keeping track of all your money. So oftentimes we don't really know where money goes, right? We're thinking to ourselves, good, I have some money, I just got paid. And all of a sudden, a week later, you know, an awful lot of that money has been spent. And sometimes we don't really know exactly where it got spent, what happened to it. So a budget is in a written form because this gives us a written record that we can keep looking at as the month is going by and say to ourselves, oh, goodness, I see where I'm spending my money. Or I see how much money I have coming in now that I have to really try harder to get through the month, you know, using my money wisely. It does have the different parts we spoke about. You do need to keep updating your budget. So for example, if you do a monthly budget, what is happening in February might be very, very different than what is happening by the time September comes around. Okay, so we will show you next week how you need to look at your budget and assess it, and what you need to do to keep it updated so that is useful to you. A budget's main function is to help you manage your money better, and it helps you to see what money is coming in, what money is going out, and also what you need to change that you're doing now that will help you to manage your money better. Okay, so and please feel free to stop me anytime if you have any questions. But if nobody has any questions, now we will go to Bob for the next slide.
Well, let's take a look at the first piece of a budget, and that is the expense side. What are expenses? Expenses are the money that is going out. The expenses are everything that you buy or pay for. And importantly, it doesn't matter how you pay for them. You can use cash. You can write a check. Not very many people do, except for my husband, but you can write a check. You can use your debit card. You can use your credit card. You can go to the bank and get a money order. These are all ways of buying or paying for things. You might have a phone app that allows you to buy things. There are other ways of transferring money electronically too, automatic payments. So the point is simply many different ways of buying or paying for things. And to Anne's point, I think that's perhaps why some people will say, where did the money go? Because it's very easy to spend money. Many ways of doing that. So if we could go on to the next slide. So what are some examples of those expenses? How do people spend their money? Well, let's talk about some of the bigger ones like rent or the mortgage payment and all of those utility bills that also go with living in an apartment or a house. But there are also other kinds of bills, like the bill for your cell phone or your landline or your TV access or the internet. Or the Disney Plus internet, lots of different ways of spending money just for entertainment, for example. Medical bills, of course. There are
Netflix.
Huh?
And
Netflix?
Yeah.
Netflix. And streaming. We could go on for a long time. Has anybody ever added up all of that? We'll get into that. Medical bills, there are doctors, there are dentists, there are other specialists, prescriptions, prescription for glasses. There are lots of expenses that can fall under that category of medical bills. And there are costs for getting around the car, whether it's gas or repairs or car payments on a loan. And if you leave that car at home, you may need to use the metro, a bus, an Uber. And then finally, my favorite, of course, is food. Whether you're going to Giant to buy food, groceries, paper towels, toothpaste, or going to a restaurant to eat out, that is normally a fairly large expense for most people. And another topic or another area where people can be spending money is sending money to other countries, to family, to friends, perhaps their gifts, or just helping out. So those are just some of the ways that folks spend money. So if we can go on to the next slide. We were giving you at least some examples of, actually, they were a little bit of the categories of spending. Expenses and spending are similar words. They mean basically the same thing. But what's important is, as you think about how you're spending money, to start thinking about what are the categories that your spending falls into. And a category is basically combining like items together, putting them together so that you can start to see patterns. It's not very helpful to say, usually, as you're thinking about budgeting, well, I spent $1.50 on carrots and I spent 79 cents on a bag of potato chips. It's more useful to say, I spent $2.50 on food. So that's the idea behind categories, and they're going to be different for different people, and it's going to be based on your lifestyle and what's important to you. But some examples for it would be coffee and snacks. That might be a category. And in that category, you would put coffee, you would put potato chips, especially these foods that you like to eat between meals, perhaps when you're out and about, you stop by Starbucks and you grab a cup of coffee, you stop by Dunkin' Donuts and you grab a donut or a brownie in the middle of the afternoon. That might be a type of spending that you want to keep track of so that you can see at the end of the week, how much did I spend on coffee and snacks? Clothing and shoes, well, that's a category. That includes socks, and it includes pants, and it includes skirts and dresses and so forth. Again, it's trying to group similar items so that you can say at the end of the week or the month or the year, how much do I spend on clothing? Groceries, we've already talked a little bit about that. Different types of food that, and depends on how you manage your how you're eating with your family. This might be the category where it's all the food that you prepare at home. It's all of the items that you buy at the Giant or the Safeway, and then you make that food and all of those other items that go into eating at home. And then there's a whole other category that is very important, apparently, for the younger generation, which is restaurant and takeout foods, because I'm amazed at the number of people in my children's generation that barely know how to cook. So this is an important way that they feed themselves, and probably a very important category for them. Again, getting back to your lifestyle and how you spend money. Wouldn't be a very important category for me, for example. My husband hates to eat in restaurants, so we eat at home. So if we can go on to the next slide, let's just chat for a minute about your expenses.
You know, another interesting category under food would be those who don't. It's not that they order out or take out, but they get their food from those companies that send you those pre-packaged meals, like
Yes.
Was it Green Chef? There's Freshly. There's so many of them now. Tavala. That could eat a chunk of the budget as well.
Yeah. And so it would be important when you think about how you're spending, it's like understand those in categories. Yep. So that you don't miss a big one that you're spending money on. So thinking about those expenses that you have, let's talk first about what are the expenses that you have that you feel that you need. These would be the expenses that, as you lived your life, you think are very important that you need. Can anybody come up with one?
Rent.
Oh yeah. Most of us need a place to live, right? Exactly. Rent is one of the very, very basic needs. Anybody want to give me another one?
How about your phone?
If it were my husband, he'd say, no. I don't need a phone. I don't want a phone. Leave me alone. But yeah, most people need a phone to stay connected, both for calling purposes, but also to be online, right? Okay, one more need.
Food.
Food. Yeah, I was going to say, how about coffee? Because that's a need for me. But I'd say food is probably a more appropriate need to put down on this list. Yeah, it's sort of basic. You're not going to go very far if you don't eat. So I think you get the point of understanding this, what are your needs, and they're going to vary. Obviously, if you have children, you may have school program needs, or the kind of equipment that the kid needs to go to school, or do a particular program in school, for example. Again, this depends on your lifestyle. How about those wants? What might be a want that wouldn't really qualify as a need, but you spend money on it?
Car.
Cable.
Car.
Cable?
Yeah. And the car.
I'm sorry?
Car.
Car?
Car.
A
Car?
car.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So cable, entertainment, it's something we love, right? But it can be really expensive. I'm amazed at how expensive it is. And is it truly a need? No, it's probably a want.
I'm guilty of that one with clothes.
Clothes. And a car, that's a really good point, because especially in metropolitan areas where you've got pretty darn good transportation, you've got the metro, you've got the bus system, you've got Ubers running around, and some places are walkable too. A car might be a much more of a want than a need in an area where we live. It's not like where you're out in rural areas where you're far from different providers. Good point. Any other thoughts about wants?
You always have to think long and hard before you go to the register and pay for something. And you ask yourself, do I need it or do I want it?
I know.
My mom would always tell me, we
Well,
need water to survive.
Yeah.
You don't need that shirt. I know you like the shirt, but you don't need it right now. You can get the
Okay.
shirt later. I'm like, but
Yeah.
I want it.
No, I did that the other day. I decided I needed a pair of sandals. Okay, did I need a pair of sandals? No, I have a pair of sandals. I also have some other shoes, but I sure wanted them. I bought them. I couldn't help myself. But to your point, that's absolutely right, Raul, is the thinking through, is this a need or is this the want? Because that's really important as you start to analyze, as you start to study the numbers that your budget is going to show you as you keep tracking your expenses. And it doesn't always happen right away. But if you keep these two questions in the back of your head, it will help you a lot as you think about, why am I spending the money that I'm spending? And with that, let's turn it back to Anne for the good news, which is income. Those are expenses. Now let's talk about the money that comes in.
All right, thank you, Bob. So yes, now we'll talk about the good news, which is our income. So income is the same sort of idea, is money coming in. Expenses, money going out, income, money coming in. Just like expenses, income is any kind of money received, no matter how you receive it. Okay, so it doesn't matter who it comes from, or where it comes from, or why it comes to you. Any money that you receive, that counts as income. So you might receive some money by cash. You know, maybe it's your birthday, maybe a relative is going to give you some cash. That's income. And note, it's even income if it's not in the form of cash, but in the form of a gift card. Okay, that also count as income. If you get a check for something, that's income. If you get money transferred into your account, that's income. And most likely you might get a direct deposit. Many jobs these days do pay their employees by direct deposit. So that money too is your income. So again, income is just any money that you receive, no matter what form it takes. And on the next slide, let's look a little bit more in detail about the kinds of income that you might receive. So here are some examples. Obviously, the main example of money you're likely to receive would be wages, which also might include tips or other earnings. Okay, so you might have a job and that pays you regularly every 2 weeks, say. You might also have a little job that some odd things for your neighbor, and your neighbor gives you a little bit of cash at the weekend because you help him mow his lawn. So, you know, any kind of money that you receive from any source is going to be your income. Perhaps you're unlucky enough, and certainly it's happened to many people during COVID, that you have not been working. So perhaps you get some various payments from the government, including an unemployment payment, or perhaps Social Security, or maybe you're on food stamps, which is called SNAP. So the SNAP program is food stamps. Or maybe you even have been unfortunate enough to have been hurt and you're actually receiving disability payments from the government. So again, any of these kinds of money coming from the government or any other source, that's all going to count as your income. Now, you might also get money that is not as regular as money coming from a job or the government. And that might be maybe a gift of money or maybe a loan, right? Maybe, especially again, during this COVID year, circumstances have been very different for very many people. So maybe you needed actually to get a loan from the bank. And maybe that's just because you weren't having the regular income that you usually have. Or maybe it was a loan for something particular. Maybe it was a loan for tuition. No matter what, if it was income coming in, you're going to count it as your income. And also some smaller things. If you have a savings account at the bank, it will generally pay you income, although that probably will be not very many dollars unless you have a very great deal of money in the bank. If you have some investments, or if you're certainly planning for retirement and you have an IRA account or some other kind of investment account, that may pay you a little bit more interest. Okay, that's all going to count as income. And finally, you might be receiving something like alimony or child support. Again, that's another form of income. So I think when we tend to think about income, we tend to think of the big obvious things like money I'm earning or money I'm receiving from the government. But don't forget, there are all these smaller sources of income that might not be regular. But for example, you might know that every year on your birthday, you know, at least 4 friends and relatives send you money. So, you know, again, when you're doing your budget, you're going to know that in your birthday month, you're going to receive some money usually, and you're going to count that. You're going to plan for that, and you're going to call that your expected income. Okay, so again, income is any kind of money you receive. So on the next slide, again, we'll take a minute as Bob did with expenses, and let's talk for a minute about your income. So would anyone like to tell me what is the money that they receive, whether it's regular, whether it's just once a year, whether it's, ooh, we didn't expect this, but look what happened. What are some of your kinds of income?
COVID has made everything tough, but pretty much unemployment.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
one. It's not something I like to talk about, but unfortunately,
Right. That's a position that a lot of people are in at the moment. And so, you know, when you're doing your individual budget, it's just all about taking your income and expenses and you manage. Okay. At the moment, it's difficult to think, you know, I wish I had income from someplace else, or, you know, oh, I like, this is not good. I wish that. But, you know, we have to go with what we are able to manage at the moment. And the point of budgeting is not to be thinking to yourself in a judgmental way, perhaps, but to be thinking to yourself, this is reality. This is what I'm living with. I have to see how I can manage, or how I can change things that I can manage better. Okay, so it's all about just seeing what you have and then getting it written down, even if occasionally that's going to be a little uncomfortable, you know. And I know during non-COVID time, I'm going to say that the thing that we are all focused on is our expenses. We're like, goodness, do I really need to buy that coffee? Do I really, you know, like I'm not doing a good job at the supermarket. I'm impulse buying. So I think in non-COVID times, it's easier to really be looking more at expenses. I think during COVID, a lot of people have a very different income than they would have otherwise. And so perhaps, you know, both sides of the equation, income and expenses, are something that we're going to really be looking at and asking ourselves, can we manage better? Okay, so it's not a judgment thing, it's a reality thing, right?
Yeah.
So if what you have is unemployment, that's what you have. And then that's going to be the starting point of our budget. So the other part, what kind of income might you be having at the minute?
I couldn't hear you. You were breaking up.
Oh, sorry. So is there any other kind of income that either of you are having at the moment? Or not really?
Outside of that, I have a housing grant because of this whole unemployment, COVID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Okay.
out of collecting.
So I think as long as we're understanding, I think that income is any money that you receive. And in the case of your life being somewhat different now than it is during non-COVID, or than you expect it to be, say, in 6 months' time, then your budget is going to change. So this is really why it's very important. What we're doing next week is looking at putting together a budget for now, but also looking to the future to see how our budget might change and how we have to continually assess it as our life circumstances change. Okay, so I think this is particularly a year where a lot of people have a very different situation than they had last year, well, 2 years ago, or than they expect to have next year. But it's really important to get started with a budget so that you can start planning for the future and see maybe what needs to change in your life situation. Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Bob so that she can talk a little bit more about our budget plan.
So let's think a little bit about what a budget plan really is. And I think we've already said a budget is a plan, and the plan part is what you think will happen. So you can plan for the expenses that you're going to have and the income that you think you're going to have for a period in time. So for example, I think I will get $100 in pay, my income, for the week. I think I will spend $60 in food for the week. That could be an example. It's very simple. One income item, one expense item, but that's the beginning of a budget. That's the plan. And you could do that for each week, each month, and to Anne's point, for a whole year. In other words, once you start thinking about what do I think I will get this week, next week, this month, next month, how much will I spend this week, next week, and so forth. It's a question of identifying, of knowing what those expenses and income are and writing them down. So that's the plan part. But the other very important part is what we call the actual, the budget actual. And the actual is what really happens. So in the case that I was giving you, where I think I will get paid $100, actual is I got paid $100 this week. So there, we know it, it happened. And I spent, let's say, $75 on food this week. So the income is the same. The second, the food expense is a little different. But that's when we're talking about actual, it's what really happened. And again, just like on the plan side, you can add these numbers up. You can do it for a day, you can do it for a week, you can do it for a month, and you can do it for a whole year. So that's the idea behind a budget, is both what did you plan, what did you think was going to happen, and then what actually happened for that period that you have you are planning for. Okay, so if we go on to the next page. So this gets into the why should you budget. So it's going to show you your budget as you do this. I think I will get this much money, $100, and I got $100. And I think I will spend $60 on food, and I spent $75 on food. That's interesting, right? We can start to ask questions about why is there a difference. But just thinking about how to ask that question is very important, because this is how you can start to help yourself pay the bills that you have and buy the things that you need. If you have that, if you think if you've gotten that $100 and you spent $75, you still have $25 if you have a bill to pay or something that you need, right? Otherwise, how would you know, except unless that $25 happens to be sitting in your wallet? I don't know. And that's the importance of being able to compare your actual to your plan. Because what happens is when you are doing that compare actual to plan, you start to think about, why did I think I was going to have $60 in food expense? Why did I spend $75? And as you ask those questions, you start to look at, well, what did I spend it on? And that's where you can start to see when you're overspending, maybe, or maybe you just didn't understand how expensive food was. So you were not doing a good job on the planning side. That's an important piece as well. And to Anne's point, she has said a couple of times the importance of then knowing where to make changes to your budget, to your plan, and maybe to what you actually do. Because once you know how, for example, well, I always spend $75 on food, at least every week. Then you know planning for 60 doesn't make any sense, right? So you can start to adjust your budget and make it in align with what you actually are doing. And that's going to help you start to manage your money much better than if you're still scratching your head and thinking, I don't know why this happens. I don't know where the money goes. And when you do that, you start to discover how you can find money. That's what we call it, is finding money, because you discover what are realistic plans. I think I'm going to have this much money, and I think I'm going to spend this much money. Let's make that realistic now. And then you spend according to that. You start to find the money for savings or accomplishing other goals that you would like to spend money on, but you weren't able to find the money before, or buy the things that you want. So that's the logic behind how to create and build a budget, and then why you would go to all of this trouble in the first place. So with that, unless there are any questions, let's take a quick walk back through what we've been talking about. Next slide, please. So here's a quick review. So what is a budget? It's a plan. It's a plan for managing your money. What are your expenses? All the different ways that you can spend money. And as we all know, there are lots and lots of ways. We live in a world that helps us spend money, does not help us save money. What is income? All of the different ways that you get money. What is a plan? What is a budget plan? Is it what you think will happen, what you think will happen? And what are actuals? Well, that's what really happens. As we say, like to say, when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So it's what you actually got and what you actually spent. So the question for you would be, why should you budget? What do you think are good reasons for you to budget? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, budget is saving money.
Yeah. It's very hard to save money if you don't budget. I mean, I suppose if you have lots and lots and lots of money and you can't spend it fast enough, you'd end up saving it. But most of us don't live in that world. Most of us have to have a plan or we can't save money. It's very hard. So yes, that's a good reason. Any other thoughts about why you should budget?
To live comfortable life.
Yeah, to live a comfortable life. I think that's a very good point for a couple of reasons. So it's comfortable because as you manage the money that you have a way of making good choices. And when you make good choices, you feel more comfortable. But there's also it's really nice not to have to worry. right? To have a plan, to know, yes, bad things can happen. And then you have to deal with it. But if you have a plan, at least you've got a foundation, you've got a base that you can feel that gives you comfort. You don't have to worry as much. If you have a plan, you follow your plan, you can see with a budget that you're meeting your goals, your plan. And that can give you a lot of comfort. Nice. Any other thoughts?
Budget means is you own money, no loan.
You have money and not a loan?
What it means, you don't want to borrow money anyone, but
Yeah.
you have your own money and your plan.
Yes, yes. It's so much better if you can manage within the money you have. Because yes, to your point about when you have to borrow money, it costs. In the first place, you have to borrow a loan. When you borrow money, you have to pay the loan back. So
Yeah,
and that's hard. That can be very hard.
yeah,
And go ahead.
and interest too.
Yes,
Yeah.
and interest too, which is more money. So always, again, back to living more comfortably, less to worry about, and then you can focus on that longer term, how you want to use your money in the future, instead of, oh, I have to pay back money and pay for the money with interest. So that can be very hard.
I
So
think
yeah.
an important thing that you're saying there is control.
Mhm.
This helps you to get control of your finances. So a lot of people, especially if they don't have much income, tend to be in a panic mode all the time, and they pay whatever bill they have, and they live from bill to bill, from paycheck to paycheck. And they never really have that feeling of control where I know what's going to happen next month. And maybe that's not what happens, but this is what I expect to happen. And if something happens differently, I have to think about that and I have to change it so that I still have control. But it's so much of a better feeling to be able to look at your budget, which we'll do next week, and say to yourself, I can manage. I am going to get through next month. I know where my money's going and I'm in control. That's such a great feeling. And I think when people do a budget and do it properly, that's the feeling they get, is I'm on top of things.
Nice. Okay, one more question is making a budget. Do you think it will be easy or hard?
Very hard.
Very hard. Very hard. Why do you think it's going to be very hard?
Because sometimes when I go even to Costco,
Mm-hmm.
I see I don't need it, but I see on a sale. Oh, I'm gonna save.
Just
So
want to take it.
Yeah.
buy it.
So true.
I said that I think it will be easy if you follow your plan, if you follow your plan and goals, but it will be hard to actually stick to like accomplish, like she was saying.
That's a challenge.
That is, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hard part is you have the plan, and then how do you stick to it, and how do you make those good decisions that meet your objectives, your plan, your goals. That can be hard. As you say, you go to Costco and you see something's on sale. They're so good at selling. This is a country that loves a sale. And it's hard to walk away.
So I can control like her, she say, if you see anything sell, you got it, but it's like no good idea, but control yourself maybe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's maybe you have to talk to yourself a little bit and say, let's think about, do I need it?
Yeah.
Do I want it? Or do I think, is somebody telling me I need it? Because sometimes these sales are ways of trying to tell you, you need this because it's such a good deal. I'll tell a little story on myself. This was some years ago. And this had to do with, I think it was a cell phone. And a guy calls and he says, we've got this great deal for you, great deal. And blah, 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 and you'll save so much money. Now, actually, it would cost me, I think, another $10, but I would get, I don't know, 3 more channels or whatever. And I said, no, thank you. And he said, don't you want to save money? And I said, no. And the salesperson was shocked because, you know, it's like they're trying to sell something by saying you will save money. Well, of course, I wasn't saving money because it was going to cost me a little bit more, but the logic was you're going to get more for your money. Like, well, I don't want it. But it was really hard to do because some people are just pushing you very hard. Either the way they display the stuff in the stores, or they call you on the phone, or you're getting the emails. This is the best deal in the world. It's hard. That part is really, really hard. Yeah.
And I think one other thing is it's really good to write it down, because I think sometimes we tell ourselves, oh, I might have spent a little extra, but I needed it, or I might have done this, but I needed that. But honestly, when you see it in writing, it's very difficult to be telling yourself something that you really know is not quite true. So that's a whole big part of writing it down. You'll find that's really, really different than just kind of having it in your head, because when you really see that written down, I think reality sets in and you say to yourself, I didn't need to do that.
I think that's a good point. And then you help learn, you're teaching yourself, you're coaching yourself about what's important. Did I really need this, or did I get confused about the value? Because that's happened to me. Oops. And that's an important thing to help yourself learn, is to write it down and then think about it. Okay, I think we are on to the last slide, which is questions or comments. Any thoughts?
Is it possible for you to go back to, I think it's the slide that says, what is income?
Sure.
I think it's 2 what is incomes. I need the first one, not the second.
That would be page. The first one was page 9. Raul.
Yeah, that's the first one, not this one.
Okay.
I have this one. Okay.
Okay, there you go.
And so Raul will be sending you a copy of the slides.
Okay.
Yeah, so you don't have to worry if you didn't get anything, because Raul was always, after each workshop, he sends you a copy of all these slides. Okay.
I didn't receive the last one because I came to another one where we talked about job training, and I never received it.
So email Raul
Okay.
after, so that he can then reply to your email and make sure you get it. Okay. Is that okay, Raul? I think that's best. And next, just to be clear, and next week, we will actually be taking a written budget. So part of the presentation will be, showing you on a slide or several slides, all the pieces, what you fill in, where you fill it in, and how you actually make the most of what you're writing down. Okay, so this was just like an introduction. Next week, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of you put this figure here, you put that figure there, and this is how you figure it all out.
But if you want to play with this a little bit before next week, our suggestion is just get out a piece of paper or on your computer, your cell phone, and make a list of all of the expenses that you have, all the income that you have for the month. What do you think it's going to look like? Just as a way to start thinking about, how would I ever do this? And you don't have to worry about it being right or wrong, just a guess. And the more you practice, the better you will get at this. You'll be surprised at how the more you do it, the easier it gets, because the good news about human beings is we're very predictable, and you will start to see patterns. But you got to start somewhere. So if you've got a little extra time, play around with this and see what you discover. Okay?
And to Anne's point, Biaba, if there's a workshop, if there's slides for a workshop that we did that you didn't get, just send me an email and I'll make sure you get it.
Okay, I have to look at the name of that.
Any other questions before we say bye? All right, then.
Thank you.
Thank you
Welcome.
for coming and for listening.
Thank
It
you.
was really nice to meet both of you and to be able to give you good information. And please come back next week.